Thanks, Julie. So yeah, Richard Dos Santos here, calling in from Copenhagen, Denmark, where I'm the country director. My background is really rooted in large-scale ERP, SAP and Oracle deployments as an implementation partner, where I focused mainly on process and functional consultancy services. And really with this perspective, I became very interested from a customer standpoint, how to elevate ERP project success by focusing ultimately on end user adoption. And this fit in quite nicely because as TTS, we've been delivering successful SAP adoption and change related projects for the last 20 plus years on some of the world's largest SAP deployments. So certainly I'm looking forward to sharing some of these insights with you today in the hopes that you may derive some insight from my experience. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Max Lentos. I'm from the corporate learning department of TTS in Berlin. I've been working for TTS for like 17 years or so, and I've started as an e-learning author, and these days I'm a project manager and team manager, and I regularly work as a qualification consultant in SAP implementation projects. And I would like to share some experience today with you.
Yeah, hello, my name is Helena. I just started at TTS in the beginning of this year. Quite before, I was responsible for process optimization with the main focus on SAP. And that's maybe the reason why I'm here standing with you and talking about some topics. So I know some challenges and topics which are maybe familiar with you. And so let's start and talk about SAP and to really have it focused on the people who are working with it. So as we know that S4HANA is like a really big topic for customers because it has a really big influence on everyday's work. What is your experience, even how to start with a project at this size, Axel?
Yeah, what we need is a thorough learning analysis. We have an echo here. Okay, I start again. Right now. We start with this thorough learning training analysis phase, training need analysis phase, where we take what we get together with the customer in terms of blueprints, process models, workbooks, process documentation that is available at the customer. Break it down to task level if possible. Yeah, we do. We need to do that, and then check and the roles and target groups involved in the processes. And in the next step, try to find out which is the appropriate learning format for which task and for which process or which sub-process. Then we also try to estimate like an effort, a duration, if it's a training or if it's an e-learning or if it's a guide, will be decided based on the purpose and also the size of the target group. So if we have a basic thing, a generic thing like SAP, basic navigation, like Fiori Launchpad, how does it work? How do you enter applications? Then we, for example, usually decide for a web-based training because that's a large target group. Everybody has to know that. It has to be available whenever there are new hires. They have to be onboarded and can use the SAP basic training to get accustomed to the system they have to work with. And then we go to the specifics based on that. We take a look at the specific tasks and processes and check, well, are they like employee-based processes, for example, like time, recording times. Usually a lot of employees, a big target group is involved, then we create e-learning again. But for more complex topics, like in finance, for example, we might rather decide that there's a training or a workshop necessary. And what we get in the end is a matrix. We have the processes, we have the tasks, we have the roles, we have the learning format, and we have an idea of the effort involved and the duration of the method. That's our learning need analysis or training need analysis. It's a big Excel sheet. And then in the next step, we can move on to qualification concept. And at the core of the qualification concept is the result of the training need analysis. And then we can add other aspects like stakeholders of the projects, which are basically the SMEs and their roles and their tasks, what they are responsible for in the course of the implementation project when it comes to qualification, because there is quite some responsibility for them. Obviously, I will get back to that later. And also a topic like how do we distribute the training material? How do we publish it? Yeah, and ideally we have a central platform for that. Digital adoption solution, maybe we will also talk about that in the course of this webinar later. That's how we start.
Yeah, if I can maybe add to that, Helena, I would tend to agree with Axel. There has to definitely be a focus around the task and process level understanding that we wish to impart, to the employee base. Ultimately, I think an S4 project is so much more than just a lift and shift exercise. Fundamentally, a lot of our customers are definitely thinking about it as an opportunity to reimagine their operating models and drive that customer satisfaction that the digital transformation should be moving in the direction of. But also it's an opportunity to remove silos, right, that have built up in the organization and connect people from a workflow perspective. And so, as Axel mentioned, we really need to be thinking about future business processes and then establish how SAP can support them. Largely there are best practices inherent to the platform. We should leverage them. And I think with this end goal in mind, no matter how long it takes to get there, one can, certainly be focusing on working towards that objective. So absolutely, Axel, I would concur with you on that.
That's very interesting because you both were talking about different formats, for example, like e-learnings or IT documentations. And a question I often really get is like, who is creating all this content and who's taking care about it? Because in the life cycle of a project, you really have some changes, and who's taking care about these changes to really do this documentation? And what are your experience? Who is doing it? Because the companies do not really have this specific department who's responsible for doing documentations. What are your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one that is even considered less is who's maintaining it, right, once post go live occurs. So I think there's no surprises here that in a world of constant change, which we're all living in, saddling one or a few people with the responsibility is ultimately a recipe for disappointment when you start thinking about global scale, which is obviously the domain of SAP. And think about it in terms of the combined knowledge of all business subject matter experts and all the functional team members, as well as the learning specializations. That becomes a very tall order for one or even a small group of people to obviously pick up with. And so therefore, I think it becomes really imperative that we're able to leverage those combined insights from all of those team members in some kind of structured content lifecycle approach, right? And I definitely see a decentralization trend with digital transformation leaders where they're moving towards this concept of user-generated content, where effectively we're pushing content creation to the persons who understand the business domain best. But at the same time, this doesn't mean that we give up control, of course, and just release content into the wild, but rather allows us to respond to a process and system change in a more agile way that ensures that our content is always representative of the current thinking. And I think, this is a big shift that's occurred in the last couple of years, for a variety of reasons, a pandemic of which is the least, of course, but, naturally there's this trend that's been underflowing all of these efforts in terms of decentralization of knowledge management.
I can see. So the next step is but sometimes you really have to do some knowledge transfer in the company or when working with some partners. So how do you really find the experts in your company and handle the knowledge transfer in the company then, or to a partner when you're working in the project?
Yeah, that's a crucial point, actually. When we as from a writer's perspective, we need to have different skill levels for different roles. For example, if you work in a qualification project as a trainer, you need to have a deep SAP knowledge, deep and relevant SAP skills to be able to work with the subject matter experts on eye level and to decide which specifics will be added to a generic process training. Yeah, so you need to have deep SAP skills to support the qualification, to create trainings and to conduct the trainings. For an e-learning author like me, for example, what we need is a basic understanding of SAP, and then we also team up with the SMEs, with the workstream experts, and we create like two-headed teams for business areas, maybe for end-to-end processes these days. And there's one author, one e-learning author, and one subject matter expert who works with them and makes sure that the e-learning author or the trainer knows all the business specifics that are relevant for the organization we work for. So we have these tandem teams, yeah, two-headed teams working with each other. It's important to prepare for this knowledge transfer phase. We can use all the process overviews we can get from the project, from the implementation team, and we also use a lot of, we usually use test scripts, yeah, to prepare for the processes and tasks that we need to record or create training material for. It's important to point out at an early stage in the implementation process to the subject matter experts that this is part of their scope, of their job scope, that they do have a lot of tasks always. So it's good to raise awareness in an early stage that there's also qualification and they cannot be neglected, and that they will be involved in that, and they will be responsible for knowledge transfer and also for review of training material coming in, to make sure that in the end we have finalized, at the end of the qualification phase, we have finalized appropriate quality training material. Yeah, so they need some time. They will need some time, and that's a message here for them.
I understand. I mean, when we are talking about SAP, we're always thinking that when you're implementing S4HANA, everything is fine, but we are talking about documentation, e-learning, training, and some other process informations you really need to really get to the people and transfer the knowledge you have in the company. So what we can see is that you also need some supporting tools to really get to this point, so the employees can reach out to this information they really need in their everyday work. So what exactly do you really need in the tool? So which functions are really necessary when it comes to a tool selection regarding a SAP project?
Yeah, that sounds like a really tall order from a software perspective, but I think if you distill it down to some base components, there's really three things that you need to be thinking about. And the analogy of the golden triangle, I think, is particularly apt in this discussion, where we're looking at people, processes, and technology. And I think that's still true to this day. So if you think about it process-wise, employees need to understand the upstream and the downstream SAP and business processes that are relevant in the context of their work, and ultimately draw them a picture so they get a complete overview of where they fit into the process and how the various content elements that Axel alluded to earlier can support them, in that workflow, right, where they are actually working alongside SAP. I think that's fundamental. But naturally, processes are supported by technology. That's the reason we're having this discussion today about SAP S4HANA. And so effectively, we need to figure out how do we optimize the efficient execution of the employee's work within that system, being SAP. Because ultimately, if we can do that, then we're able to elevate the performance that they are able to execute from a system perspective. And that really gives us that return on the investment that we put forth in the best business case when we motivated that there was a basis to undergo this transformation that we need to from an ERP perspective. And then lastly, from a business standpoint, in the same way that we selected SAP as our preferred platform of choice for our business transactions. And we effectively selected it for the scale and scope that we would be able to leverage in the platform. There is obviously nuance that exists in a global deployment of a platform like SAP, or even in the nuance that exists within country-specific business processes. So I don't think we should underestimate the importance of that localization, whether it's as simple as language that needs to be delivered, content needs to be delivered in a particular language, or how do we manage the nuance that exists in the way that processes are executed in a particular country. Those all represent context that's important to our employees when we look to deploy a tool like this that kind of gives us the breadth and scope that we would need to support SAP, but also is relevant particularly to that employee, as Axel mentioned, based on a task, on a role perspective.
I can see. I mean, of course, today we are sitting here around and talking about S4HANA because we want to give a focus on people, like the webinar is named. So the big point we really have to talk about in the end is, I think, the main topic regarding a project at this size is like change management. We are talking about changes in our everyday work, in the processes, and maybe so also the company strategy, maybe, we don't know. So in your experience, how do you really manage a change in companies like this?
Yeah, that's obviously a big thing. I can think of two main aspects. The first one would be to provide clarification to people on what's in it for them to realize, recognize their benefits coming up with a new system. That's the job of the change management. Part of that can be to ensure support. Yeah, support for the learners, for the users at an early stage. Introduce a central platform. We talked about that, a digital adoption platform, a knowledge platform, a portal. A single point of truth at an early stage to give people some security in their everyday business. Also, not only the end users, but already the key users in the implementation project, so that they can already use an infrastructure that supports them in their everyday tasks. Yeah. So these would be my two aspects that come to my mind right now. Of course, it's a big topic, but maybe Richard has something to add to that from his perspective.
Yeah, I'll definitely pick up on something that you started, Axel, which in my view is a crucial component to a project of this magnitude, and that is the importance of change practitioners, right? And so having change practitioners on board who understand the importance of this transformation program and are well versed in what are the objectives relating to the desired employee experience. I think that's a very crucial component that Axel started, and I think the underpinning reasons for that are quite well known, in that many on-premise SAP customers will transition the way they work with this upgrade, right? So it's not just an upgrade anymore; it's a complete change to the way of work in many situations as well. And so therefore, it becomes as much about the adoption of the new technology as it does about understanding the way that employees' work will change too. And if we can do that, then again, we're able to understand how the new processes need to be constructed, how the new technology can support that, such that we ultimately leverage the benefits that SAP S4HANA could bring us if we do those things successfully. So I think in some respects, what Axel has mentioned is effectively a new methodology, a new way of thinking that supports and enables those employees in a holistic manner, right? And I think that's really what we're focusing on. If we think about the people, process, technology components, that's what I would call a holistic approach to be successful with SAP. And so it's definitely not just a question about training employees about which buttons to push. I mean, this goes way beyond the scope of that. But I'm also very curious, Helena, to hear what everybody else thinks about these dimensions. So it'd be great if anybody had any questions that kind of touch on these aspects which you've mentioned today. The scope of SAP S4HANA is a very big discussion, way more than we can cover in a 30-minute session. But I certainly would be very interested to see what other issues are people looking at when they start plotting their SAP migrations and upgrades.